My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 72 years old, and I used to run a little bakery on Maple Street before I retired. That's all you need to know about me, because the rest of what I am was decided on a night when the snow refused to stop falling. It was New Year's Eve, and the world outside shimmered like crystal glass, each flake glittering against the porch light as if heaven had tossed diamonds in pity. Inside my son's mansion, laughter spilled through the windows. I stood on the doorstep, holding a gift bag in one hand and a box of cinnamon rolls in the other, still warm from my oven. Mark had said, "Mum, it's just a small gathering, close friends and family." But when I walked in, I saw chandeliers, champagne, and women wearing sequins that could blind the moon. No one came forward to hug me. Claire, my daughter-in-law, looked up from the bar and smiled that sweet, sharp smile people wear when they wish you'd stayed home. "Oh, you made it, Evelyn," she said, brushing invisible dust off her dress. "You didn't have to bring anything." I told her it was tradition. I had baked every New Year's Eve since 1976. She nodded politely, like I'd mentioned the weather. Someone took my coat without meeting my eyes. The pianist changed songs. My presence was a draft they wanted to close the door on. Still, I sat in a corner, pretending to enjoy the music. I placed the pastries on the buffet table beside the imported desserts no one touched. Through the grand mirror on the wall, I could see reflections of people whispering, glasses clinking, and the faintest smirk curling on Claire's lips each time someone glanced at me with pity. When Mark finally approached, he didn't sit down. "Mum," he said, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "Claire's friends are here from New York, so maybe just relax tonight, okay? Don't get tired." Relax, that word again. The polite way to say disappear cue, Whitley. He didn't ask about my health. He didn't ask if I was warm. But I wasn't warm at all. A memory tugged at me. New Year's Eve 20 years ago, when George and I had danced in our bakery after closing. Flour still on our hands, music from a cracked radio, our son perched on the counter laughing. That was the kind of warmth no fireplace could fake. I blinked, and the memory broke. The laughter now belonged to strangers. Dinner was announced. They seated me at the end of the table, across from the pantry door, next to the coat rack. My name card read, Mrs. E. Harper, as if even my name embarrassed them. Claire gave a speech about gratitude and growth. Everyone toasted. I raised my glass of sparkling water and whispered a prayer that gratitude would visit her someday. Halfway through dessert, she leaned over. "Mum, you look flushed. Why don't you get a bit of fresh air?" Her voice dripped honey, but her eyes told me it was an order. So I did what polite mothers do. I obeyed. I took my scarf, stepped outside, and breathed in the frost. Snowflakes landed on my sleeves like tiny apologies. Behind me, the heavy door clicked shut. I turned to go back in, but the handle refused to move. Locked. At first, I laughed softly. Surely someone would realize, any minute now. Through the wide glass window, I saw silhouettes dancing. Claire lifted her champagne flute toward Mark, and for a heartbeat, our eyes met through the glass. She raised her glass higher and smiled. That's when I knew. It wasn't a mistake. I stood there as the wind pressed against my coat. My shoes sank into the snow and my breath turned to clouds. The music inside swelled, horns, claps, cheers, while outside the only rhythm was the frantic beat of my heart. I knocked once. No one came. Twice. Still nothing. By the third knock, my hand was trembling too hard to make sound. "Happy New Year!" someone shouted inside. Fireworks crackled overhead, bursting into colours that reflected on the icy glass between me and them. For a moment, I saw my reflection overlapping theirs, the lonely shadow of a mother they had erased. The frost crept up my scarf, biting through wool. I wanted to cry, but the tears froze before they could fall. In that cold silence, a truth clearer than ice settled in my chest. I had raised a family who no longer remembered love. I looked at the gift bag still hanging from my arm. Inside, a photo frame I had bought for Mark and Claire. It said, "Family, forever always." The irony almost made me laugh. I placed it gently on the porch rail. Let them find it in the morning, coated in snow like the love they buried. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I don't recall. I only remember the glow of the porch light dimming, the quiet ache in my knees, and the whisper of my late husband's voice in my memory. "Don't let them take your heart, Evie." "I won't," I whispered back, to the wind. Because even then, beneath the cold, a small ember of defiance flickered. They thought they'd locked me out, but all they'd done was lock themselves in. When the neighbour's headlights finally swept across the driveway, I waved weakly. Mr. Carter from next door rushed over, horror on his face. He helped me into his car, wrapped a blanket around me, and cursed under his breath about those heartless rich fools. I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror. From that distance it almost looked peaceful, like a postcard from a life I no longer owned. Inside me, something shifted. The snowstorm would end, but their storm was just beginning. As the engine heater hummed, I closed my eyes and promised myself. Before the clock struck the next midnight, the truth would no longer belong to me alone. Mr. Carter insisted on driving me straight home that night, but home didn't feel like home anymore. It was too quiet, too honest. No music, no pretending. Just the ticking of the old wall clock my husband once fixed with tape and faith. I made tea with trembling hands, though I couldn't taste it. The spoon clinked against the cup, soft and lonely, and I realized how much sound we create just to feel alive. As the window fogged, my mind went back, to flower-dusted mornings and sugar-scented air, to the place where my story truly began. George and I had opened Harper's Heavenly Bakes in 1975 with nothing but a second-hand oven and our wedding rings as collateral. We were poor but joyful, measuring success in smiles, not dollars. Our son Mark grew up behind the counter. He learned to count change before he could spell custard. Every Christmas he'd help frost cookies shaped like stars, and when customers praised him, his little chest would puff with pride. "Someday, Mum," he'd say, "I'll make this bakery famous." And I'd laugh. "Just promise me you'll never forget the recipe for kindness." He didn't. Not then. But people change when comfort replaces struggle. George passed away 20 years ago. Heart failure on a rainy Tuesday. The world blurred for months after that. The bakery felt too big for one set of hands, but closing it felt like betrayal. So I kept it open, pouring grief into bread dough and tears into frosting until both began to taste the same. Mark helped at first. He was gentle, protective, everything a son should be. Then came Claire. She walked into the bakery one afternoon with city perfume and a diamond that sparkled like ambition. She called me Mrs. Harper, even after the wedding. And she never bought bread, only macarons, the kind that look perfect but taste hollow. When Mark told me he was moving to the city to start a business with her fail, Millie's money, I smiled for his sake. He promised they'd visit often. They didn't. I remember the day he called, "Mum, the bakery's too small town. You should retire. We'll take care of you." I wanted to believe him. I sold the bakery 2 months later, the same week the for sale sign collected its first raindrop. The buyers paid less than it was worth, but I told myself peace was priceless. I moved into a small cottage Mark bought in my name, or so I thought, and started living quietly, like a bookmark in someone else's story. Claire liked things modern. She remodeled their home, threw charity galas, posted smiling photos online. In every picture, she was centered, radiant, the kind of woman who said, "Family means everything," while glancing at her reflection. Whenever I visited, I felt like an antique on display, polished out of obligation. One afternoon, I brought a jar of homemade orange marmalade. Claire accepted it with a delicate grimace. "Oh, Evelyn, so sweet of you. We're trying to cut sugar, but thank you." That jar sat untouched for a year on their kitchen shelf. When I saw it again, the lid was rusted. I thought of my heart the same way, sealed, preserved, quietly spoiling. Mark grew busier with each passing year. He stopped calling me Mum in front of others. It became Mother. He sent checks on my birthday instead of letters. I never cashed them. Money can't buy warmth. It can only rent guilt. The first New Year's after George's death, I hosted a small dinner at my cottage. I cooked his favourite stew, set 3 plates, and waited. Mark called half an hour before midnight. "Sorry, Mum. Claire's parents invited us last minute. Next year, okay?" "Of course, darling," I said, pretending the soup didn't taste like salt from my tears. Next year turned into next decade. The neighbours invited me sometimes, but I always found reasons to stay home. I told myself solitude was peace, though it was really self-protection. When you've given love freely and had it returned with convenience, even kindness feels dangerous. Still, I never stopped baking. Every Sunday morning, the smell of rising dough filled my cottage. It was my way of remembering who I was before titles like burden replaced mother. 3 winters ago, Mark's company faced trouble. He came to me, nervous smile, polished shoes. "Mum, just a small favour. We need collateral for a bridge loan. You still have the deed to your cottage, right? It's temporary, I swear." I signed, because love doesn't check the fine print. He said it'd be over in 6 months. It wasn't. Claire called later, her tone sugar-coated acid. "Evelyn, you really shouldn't worry about all these legal terms. You'll always have a roof over your head." She said it like a promise. I heard it like a threat. I started writing letters to George again, unmailed, folded neatly in a tin box. "Dear George," I'd write, "they're building empires with bricks I baked. They call me family but treat me like furniture. And sometimes I miss being seen." The act of writing steadied me, but it also sharpened something, an awareness that silence protects abusers more than it heals victims. Early December, Mark called after months of absence. His voice was rehearsed warmth. "Mum, come spend New Year's with us. We want to celebrate properly that it's time." I hesitated. Something inside me whispered caution, but another part, the mother who still believed love could fix things, won. So I agreed. I bought a new dress. Nothing fancy, just navy wool with pearl buttons. I wrapped a framed photo of George and me for their mantel. I baked cinnamon rolls the way Mark liked as a child. I even wrote a toast, tucked into my purse. "To family, the first home we ever know." I never got to read it. On December 30th, I found an envelope slipped into my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a legal draft titled Property Transfer Agreement. It bore my name and a signature that looked eerily like mine. The words blurred, but one line burned into my mind. Transfer of ownership of residence located at 128 Maple Crescent to Mark and Claire Harper. I felt my pulse drum in my ears. The cottage, my last piece of George's world, was being handed away. They hadn't even asked. They'd assumed. I held the paper against the lamplight, searching for mercy in the ink. None. Only betrayal in neat legal language. I didn't call them, not yet. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. That night, I went to the kitchen and baked. Not out of habit, but out of fury. Flour scattered like snow on the counter. Each knead was a memory. Mark's first birthday cake, George's favourite scones, Claire's first visit when I'd tried to impress her. By dawn, the kitchen smelled of rage disguised as sweetness. I packed the pastries carefully and whispered, "For the last time." I wasn't going to confront them with tears this time. I was going to confront them with truth. And if they thought age had made me fragile, they'd soon learn what years of silence can ferment into. On the morning of New Year's Eve, frost painted the windows white. I dressed slowly, steady hands, steady breath. When I looked in the mirror, I saw lines carved by both love and betrayal. They were my proof of living. As I stepped out, I took one last look at the cottage. The lemon plant George had grown on our first anniversary still sat by the window, leaves trembling in the cold. "I'll come back for you," I whispered. Whether that was a promise or a prayer, I didn't know. By evening, the mansion glittered with lights. I rang the bell, clutching my pastries. The rest, you already know. But what they didn't know was this. I had already decided to stop being the background of their story. The woman they locked out in the snow was not a victim. She was the storm they had summoned. If Evelyn's story reminds you of silent sacrifices that went unnoticed, share your thoughts below. Have you ever felt forgotten by those you loved most? Subscribe for more stories where truth, dignity, and karma always find their way home. When morning came, the world outside looked too clean, as if the snow had tried to erase the night before. But you can't cover the kind of cold that lives inside a heart. The envelope still sat on my kitchen table where I'd left it, a silent guest I hadn't dared to confront. Its corners were curled from the steam of untouched tea, and the signature at the bottom kept staring at me like a lie that had learned to write my name. I told myself to stop looking, but my eyes wouldn't obey. Every line on that page whispered betrayal dressed as business. Estate simplification, financial clarity, transfer of ownership. Phrases so polite they almost bowed before cutting your throat. I traced the pen marks that pretended to be mine. Whoever had done it knew the tilt of my hand, the rhythm of my loop, the little tremor in the eye of Evelyn. That kind of imitation doesn't come from a stranger. It comes from someone who's watched you sign birthday cards your whole life. I sat there in my robe, the sound of the clock louder than breathing, and I realized love can be used as handwriting practice by those you trust most. I didn't cry. I'd already spent too many tears on people who mistook them for weakness. Instead, I folded the paper neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and whispered to myself, "Not yet." For years, I'd let peace be the price of silence. But that morning, peace felt like poison. So I took my coat, buttoned it up to my throat, and went into town. The air bit my cheeks as if trying to wake me. The snow had turned grey along the curbs, heavy with the footprints of people who still believed in fairness. I no longer did. When I reached the law office, an old brick building I hadn't entered since George's will, it smelled of dust, peppermint, and old promises. The man behind the desk, Mr. Langley, was older now, softer around the edges, but his eyes still held the same careful kindness. He greeted me with surprise. "Mrs. Harper, it's been years. How have you been?" "I'm not sure," I said quietly, "but I need you to tell me whether I still have a home." He frowned, motioned for me to sit, and began reading the papers. His expression changed the way daylight does when clouds move in front of it, slowly, but completely. "This isn't your signature," he said finally. "It's been copied from an old document. Whoever did this used a scan. If this were filed officially, it would appear legitimate." My stomach clenched. "So they can just take it?" "Not yet," he answered gently. "Not if we act before they register it. But you'll need proof that you didn't consent. Messages, witnesses, anything that shows intent." I nodded, though my mind wasn't with him anymore. I was somewhere between disbelief and a strange calm that didn't feel like fear at all. It felt like preparation. He warned me to be cautious, said something about legal procedures and timing, but all I heard was the ticking of George's pocket watch inside my purse, the one that had stopped at 11:59 the night he died. It felt as if time had been waiting for me to notice something. I thanked Mr. Langley and promised to return with proof. By the time I stepped outside, snow was falling again, slow, deliberate flakes, like the sky was thinking. I walked home through the hush of it, the letter clutched in one hand and a new thought in the other. They think I'm too old to fight. They don't know how dangerous regret can become when it's given purpose. At home, I lit the fireplace, though the flames couldn't reach the chill in my bones. I poured myself tea, took out the envelope again, and laid it beside my old phone. George used to record everything: recipes, customer orders, even bedtime stories for Mark when he was little. "Voices don't lie," he'd say. It had seemed silly then. Now it felt prophetic. I scrolled through the phone's voice notes, years of recordings labelled with careless names: groceries, utilities, dinner. Then one caught my eye. Lunch. Mark and Claire. Neverned, I pressed play. The clinking of silverware filled the room, followed by Claire's bright, sharp voice. "She'll never notice, Mark. We'll tell her it's a tax form." He laughed, soft, guilty. "I don't want to lie to her." "Lie?" Claire scoffed. "We're protecting her. She doesn't need the stress of managing property at her age." Her age. My age. The words hung in the air like smoke. Then came the sentence that hollowed the air from my chest. "Besides," she said, "when she's gone, we'll already have everything sorted." When she's gone. I stopped the recording and sat very still. The tea beside me had gone cold, but my pulse burned. I played it again, just to be sure I wasn't hearing ghosts. But no, it was there, clear as the chime of betrayal. I copied the file onto a small USB drive, labelled it Truth, and slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan. The metal was cold against my palm, but for the first time in years, I felt warm inside. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the fire die to embers and thought about how easy it is to mistake endurance for forgiveness. I'd endured their distance, their condescension, their careful cruelty disguised as care, all because I wanted peace. Peace doesn't survive in dishonest homes. It suffocates. At dawn, I called Mr. Langley again. "I have what you need," I told him. My voice surprised me. It sounded steady, almost new. He advised me to send copies, not originals, and mentioned something about filing an injunction. I barely listened. My mind was already ahead, beyond paperwork, beyond quiet justice. I wanted them to face what they'd done, not in silence, but in front of every person who'd ever believed their perfect facade. Later that day, the phone rang again. It was Mark. "Mum, hey, just checking on you. Claire felt awful about the door thing at the party. You know how these events get. Someone must have locked it by accident." By accident. I almost laughed. "Of course," I said lightly. "Accidents happen." He exhaled with relief. "I knew you'd understand. Oh, and listen, we'll handle your property taxes this year. You don't need to worry." I smiled to myself. "That's kind of you, darling. But I've already handled it." There was silence on the other end, the kind that stretches like rubber before it snaps. "What do you mean, handled it?" he asked. "Oh, just making sure everything's legally protected. I wouldn't want another misunderstanding." "Mum, what misunderstanding?" I let him drown in the pause. "You tell me," I said softly, and hung up. The phone rang again, but I didn't answer. Some conversations deserve endings, not continuations. That evening, I stood by the window and watched the snow fall heavier. I thought about the years I'd spent teaching my son the difference between right and easy. I'd taught him well, too well perhaps. He'd learned to choose the easy path every time. The reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, an older woman with eyes like winter wood, stripped but unbroken. I whispered to her, "They thought you'd forgotten how to fight, didn't they?" The reflection didn't smile, but her silence agreed. The next afternoon, Claire arrived unannounced. Her car's tires hissed against the slush, and she swept into my living room in a fur coat the colour of new snow. Her perfume reached the door before she did. "Evelyn! Thought I'd drop by. I felt terrible about that door thing. Honestly, what a silly mix-up. I gestured toward the kettle. Tea? She shook her head, eyes darting around the room. You really should think about updating this place. It's so quaint. Quaint. Another word that meant outlived its purpose. Her gaze landed on the papers on my table. What's all that? Just paperwork, I said, sliding them aside. I've been organizing things lately. You know, making sure everyone gets what they deserve. Her smile tightened. Oh? You mean like inheritance stuff? Something like that. She laughed, but her voice wobbled. You're not getting paranoid, are you? Marion said you've been confused lately. I met her eyes. Confused? No, dear. I'm very clear these days, clear about who I raised and what I lost doing it. Her mouth twitched. We just want what's best for you. I leaned closer. And I just want you to see what that looks like. You will, soon enough. Her cheeks flushed. Evelyn, are you threatening me? No, I said, almost kindly. I'm promising you honesty. She stayed only long enough to pretend calm, then left in a flurry of perfume and fear. Through the window, I watched her car speed down the icy road. When her taillights disappeared, I finally exhaled. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. That night, I opened George's old pocket watch. The hands were frozen at 11:59, the minute before endings become beginnings. I wound it once, felt the click of purpose, and whispered, Tomorrow night, love. Midnight. I wrote everything down, names, dates, every false kindness. Then, on a clean page, I began the speech I would deliver at their grand charity gala. The invitation still lay on my counter, printed in gold. Harper Foundation New Year Reprise, a celebration of family and generosity. Generosity. What a perfect place for confession. My handwriting was slow, deliberate, like kneading dough after years of forgetting how. I didn't write to wound them. I wrote to show them what they'd become. I ended the page with one line, short and steady as a heartbeat. You locked me out in the cold, but you left the door to your own secrets wide open. When I put down the pen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. Not the kind you beg for to keep a family together, the kind you earn when you finally choose yourself. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, but it no longer looked cruel. It looked cleansing. Tomorrow, the world would celebrate another year. Tomorrow, I would end the last all, properly. The evening of the gala came wrapped in gold and lies. Snow had turned to glassy ice along the mansion's driveway, so smooth it mirrored the stars. Every window glowed with warmth, but I knew better now. Warmth, in that house, was only decoration. I arrived early, just before the first cars began to pull in. The doorman looked surprised to see me, but polite training kept him quiet. Good evening, Mrs. Harper, he said, taking my coat. His gloves brushed against the sleeve where George's old pocket watch rested, ticking again after all those silent years. Inside, music spilled through the halls, violins and polite laughter stitched together like embroidery hiding a stain. Guests moved in satin and tuxedo threads, the scent of champagne hovering over conversations about donations and family legacies. I walked slowly, the way one walks through a dream that used to belong to them. Everywhere I looked, I saw pieces of myself disguised as luxury. The marble countertop I'd helped them choose. The crystal vases Claire had once claimed were too sentimental when they were mine. Even the centerpiece flowers came from the garden I used to tend. Mark saw me before Claire did, his face lifted in a smile too rehearsed to be love. Mom, you made it. I wouldn't miss it, I said. My voice carried further than I expected. Heads turned briefly, curious. He led me to a corner near the piano, away from the cameras, away from pride. Let's keep you comfortable here, he said, like a nurse settling a patient. Claire floated over moments later, her gown glinting silver under the chandelier. "Evelyn, you look lovely." She kissed the air near my cheek. Her perfume stung. "Thank you," I said. "I wore something simple. Didn't want to outshine the hosts." Her laugh came thin, brittle. "You could never outshine me, dear." The musicians began playing softly. The crowd gathered near the saint. Age for the opening toast. I stayed seated, watching Claire perform generosity. Every word she spoke was dipped in honey and calculation. "Tonight," she said into the microphone, "we celebrate family, the roots that hold us steady, and the hearts that keep us kind." The room applauded. I wondered how many hearts in that room would still be kind, if stripped of witnesses. When her speech ended, Mark joined her, hand on her waist. Perfect husband to the perfect wife. "And let's raise our glasses," he added, "to our families, past, present, and future." I raised my glass too, but mine was empty. As the applause echoed, Claire leaned close and whispered, "Try to smile, Evelyn. People are watching." "Oh, I'm smiling," I said softly. "They just can't see what for yet." She didn't understand, but something in my tone made her eyes flicker. For the first time that night, she looked uneasy. The evening rolled forward in waves of performance. Waiters glided between tables, laughter swelled and ebbed, cameras flashed. Guests gushed about Claire's philanthropy, her modern values, her ability to balance business and compassion. If hypocrisy had a melody, that room was its orchestra. I listened quietly, sipping water that tasted of glass. I could feel the speech in my purse, folded neat and patient. The USB drive rested beside it, small but powerful, proof humming like electricity in my pocket. At 9:30, dessert was served. Claire stood to announce an auction for charity, listing items donated by friends of the family, jewellery, art, even a vacation home. Each bid rose higher than the last, money thrown at virtue. And then she said it. "And finally, the Harper family home, our beloved cottage on Maple Crescent, will be pledged tonight as part of our new community trust." The words struck like thunder inside my chest. I felt the air thicken. Guests clapped. Cameras flashed. My home pledged without my voice as spectacle. Mark looked proud, his hand steady on her back. I set down my glass carefully, stood, and adjusted my shawl. My legs felt steady, my heartbeat not frantic, but certain. Claire's eyes caught mine as I walked toward the stage. For a second, she thought I was coming to join the applause. But I didn't stop at the first step. I kept walking until the microphone cast its reflection on my face. The crowd went still, the kind of still that comes before the first crack of a storm. I smiled gently. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Evelyn Harper. Some of you may remember me as the woman who owned that beloved cottage. I'm so touched to see it's being given away." A few polite laughs, the kind that don't know where to land. Claire's face froze mid-smile. Mark's hand tightened around his glass. "I wasn't on tonight's programme," I continued. "But since the theme is family, perhaps a mother's voice belongs somewhere in the music." No one moved, only the faint hum of the violinist tuning a string in nervous habit. "I've spent 72 years believing family meant trust," I said. "I gave everything I had to mine, my time, my home, my heart, and in return, I was given a document like this." I pulled the folded paper from my purse and laid it on the podium. The room craned forward like one body holding its breath. "This," I said, "is a copy of the legal transfer my son and daughter-in-law prepared. Without my knowledge, with my forged signature, they plan to take the very home you just applauded over." A murmur swept through the crowd. Mark's voice cut through it. "Mom, that's ridiculous. You must be confused." "Confused," I repeated, my voice calm as winter water. "You told her that word, didn't you, Claire? that I was confused, forgetful, too old to notice the pen wasn't mine. Claire's mouth opened, but no words came. I may be old, I said, but my memory works fine, especially when recorded. The lights seemed to flash. Aka as I lifted the USB drive. I plugged it into the projector's port beside the stage, where minutes earlier they'd displayed photos of Claire's charity work. The speakers hissed. Then came voices. Claire's. She'll never notice, Mark. We'll tell her it's for taxes. Then Mark's, faint but undeniable. I don't like lying to her. Lying? Claire's voice again. We're protecting her. And ourselves. The crowd gasped, the kind of gasp that feels physical. Someone whispered, My God. I looked at my son, whose face had drained of every colour he owned. You said you didn't like lying, I told him softly. But you still did it. Claire stumbled forward. That recording is fake. This is blackmail. Truth, I said, isn't blackmail. It's light. It only hurts if you've been living in the dark. Mark tried to reach for the microphone, but the guests had already begun murmuring to one another. The lawyer from the local paper, whom I'd invited quietly, was recording everything. Cameras were out. Not the family's photographers, but guests with phones, hungry for spectacle. I stepped back, letting the silence speak. In that moment, I wasn't humiliated. I wasn't old or fragile. I was the voice they'd stolen, returning home. Claire started to cry, not gentle tears, but loud, angry sobs that sounded like panic. She shouted at Mark, at the guests, at me. You planned this! You wanted to ruin us! I met her eyes. No, Claire. You ruined yourself. I just stopped helping you hide it. Mark grabbed her arm, trying to calm her, but she jerked away. The press flashes caught every motion, the trembling hand, the tear-streaked mascara, the audience's frozen pity. I leaned toward the microphone once more. The law will take care of the papers, but as for the rest, I'm done pretending blood means loyalty. Then I closed the pocket watch in my hand. The ticking stopped. Midnight had arrived. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, slowly, the applause began. Not loud, not cheerful, but heavy, uncertain, moral. It spread like thawing ice. People clapping not for me, but for truth, finally walking upright among them. I left the stage. Mark reached out as I passed, his voice breaking. Mom, please don't do this. We can fix it. I stopped beside him. You can fix many things, Mark, but not character. That either grows or rots. You made your choice. And with that, I walked toward the exit. Behind me, voices collided. Questions, protests, shame. I didn't look back. The cold air outside hit my face like baptism. Mr. Langley waited near his car, coat collar up, holding a small envelope. It's done, he said quietly. The deed's safe in your name again, and the trust you created, it'll go into effect next week. Good, I replied. Let it help people who actually need warmth. He smiled faintly. You sure you're all right? I've never been more all right, I said. We stood there watching as lights inside the mansion flickered, as guests trickled out with hurried goodbyes, carrying gossip like torches into the night. I looked up at the sky. Snow had started again, slow, cleansing flakes falling over the driveway where I had once been left alone. The irony made me laugh softly. Last year, I murmured, they locked me out in the cold. This year, I walked out on my own. Mr. Langley held open the car door. I hesitated, turning once more toward the mansion. Through the tall windows, I could see Claire slumped in a chair, her makeup streaked. Mark bent over beside her, both of them framed by glittering lights that suddenly looked cruel. I whispered to the night, You thought the snow would silence me. It just made my voice clearer. As we drove away, I caught my reflection in the glass, an old woman with tired eyes, yes, but eyes that finally looked forward. I pressed the watch in my hand. It ticked again, softer now, like a heartbeat steadying after fear. By the time we reached the cottage, the horizon was faintly silver with dawn. I stepped out of the car, feeling the crunch of untouched snow under my boots, and smiled. The same world, but not the same woman. Inside, the lemon plant waited by the window, leaves glistening. I touched one gently and whispered, "We made it through another winter." Then I brewed tea, not out of habit this time, but celebration, and raised the cup to the empty chair across from me. "Happy New Year, George," I said. The truth finally came home. When dawn finally touched the curtains, I hadn't slept. The house was quiet except for the kettle sighing on the stove and the faint tick of George's watch on the table. Outside, the world looked cleaner, as if the snow itself had approved of what had happened. But peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, like the silence after thunder. I sat at the kitchen window, tea cupped between my palms, watching steam blur the world beyond the glass. I thought about faces from the night before. The shock, the murmurs, the way justice had looked almost sacred in that glittering hall. I hadn't planned the applause. I hadn't needed it. The truth had done its own speaking. Still, something inside me kept circling one question. What happens after you stop being a victim? For years, my life had revolved around their needs, their moods, their approval. The performance was over now, and the stage felt strangely empty. I rose, fetched my shawl, and stepped outside. The snow crunched under my slippers, brittle but pure. The lemon plant inside the window caught a streak of sunlight, and for a moment it looked alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. I smiled at it. We survived the frost, didn't we? The world was still, and so was I. Then the phone rang. It was Mark. His voice cracked the way glass does when it remembers being sand. "Mom, please, can we talk?" I almost didn't answer. Then I did. "There's nothing left to talk about, Mark. It's all been said." "No, it hasn't. You humiliated us in front of everyone." "I told the truth," I said. "If it humiliated you, that's between you and your conscience." He was breathing hard. "You could have come to me privately." "I tried. Years ago, when you stopped listening." There was a pause. "Claire's not well. She fainted after you left." "Then maybe it's the first honest reaction she's ever had." "Please don't be dear." "Cruel," he said quietly. "Cruel?" I whispered. I was locked out in a snowstorm. I called that mercy at the time. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened. "I don't know what happened to us." "I do," I said. "You let greed move in where gratitude used to live." He tried to say something more, but I ended the call gently. There are words that only exhaust themselves when they meet silence. I set the phone down and stared at the snow again. It shimmered in the sun, and I realized how small people's power really is compared to the quiet persistence of mourning. That night at the gala had changed everything, not just for me, but for them too. By noon, news had already spread. The local paper printed a short article. Charity gala scandal. Widow exposes forged documents in public revelation. They even included a quote from me, one I hadn't planned to say but had slipped out when a reporter asked why I did it. I'd said, "Because sometimes forgiveness needs an audience." I didn't mean revenge. I meant awareness, the kind that forces others to see what they chose to ignore. Letters began to arrive, handwritten notes, some from strangers, some from people I hadn't heard from in decades. "You gave me courage," one woman wrote. "My daughter treats me like I'm invisible. Last night, I saw myself in you." Another said, "My father stole my inheritance years ago. I thought silence was dignity. Thank you for proving otherwise." I stacked the letters in a small basket by the lemon plant. Every word felt like company. That evening, as I stirred soup on the stove, headlights flared across the snow outside. I froze, ladle in hand. Through the curtains I saw Mark's car, engine still running. He stepped out slowly, shoulders hunched, no coat, only a sweater that looked too thin for the cold. He knocked once, softly, as if afraid of the door. I opened it. "Come in before you freeze," I said. He obeyed, eyes lowered. For a moment he looked exactly like the boy who used to stand in the bakery doorway after school, nervous about confessing some small mistake. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and butter. He sat at the table without being asked. "I didn't come to fight," he said. "I just needed to see you." "You saw me last night," I replied. "That wasn't you," he said. "That was someone else. Someone stronger." I smiled faintly. Maybe that was me all along. He nodded, rubbing his hands together. I listened to the recording again. I can't believe I let it happen. Claire said it was for convenience. And I wanted peace. "Peace, built on deceit, collapses," I said. "You learned that now." He looked up. His eyes were rimmed red, not just from cold. "She left," he said quietly. "Packed her things this morning. Said she couldn't stay in a town that's laughing at her." "People aren't laughing," I said. "They're remembering what truth sounds like." He exhaled shakily. "I deserved it. All of it." "No one deserves to be hated," I said softly. "But sometimes we need to be humbled." He nodded, tears finally escaping despite his attempt to swallow them. "I thought I was helping you, I really did." "I know," I said. "That's how selfishness works. It dresses up as care." For a long time we didn't speak. The only sound was the simmering pot behind us. Then he whispered, "Can I come back sometimes, just to visit?" I studied his face. There was shame there, yes, but also something truer. Remorse that didn't ask for quick forgiveness. "Yes," I said. "But visits mean nothing if they're apologies. Come when you've changed, not when you feel guilty." He nodded. When he stood to leave, I touched his sleeve. "Mark." He turned. "You still have time to become the man your father believed you'd be. Don't waste that time trying to fix your image. Fix your heart." He swallowed hard and left without another word. His footprints in the snow looked deeper than before, as if guilt made the ground heavier. After he left, I sat back down at the table, the lemon plant beside me catching the reflection of the firelight. I thought about George, what he'd say if he could see all this. Probably nothing grand, just one of his simple truths. Flower rises best when you give it time. Maybe people did too. Over the next few weeks, my days began to fill again. I helped at the local orphanage where part of my assets had been donated. The children there called me Grandma Eve, and every time I walked through their gate, I felt something unclench in my chest. Laughter returned, not forced but free, echoing through the halls like sunlight you can hear. One morning, the director brought me a letter. "It's from your daughter-in-law," she said, half curious, half cautious. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was flawless, the tone strained. "Evelyn, I won't justify myself. You've already judged me before everyone. But I hope someday you'll remember that I loved Mark in my own way. I just forgot what love was supposed to look like." There was no apology, but there was truth. Sometimes that's more than enough. I placed the letter under the pot of the lemon tree to keep it weighted so it wouldn't fly away too soon. Spring came early that year. The snow melted in sheets, revealing soil dark and patient. The cottage no longer felt empty. It felt returned. Sometimes at night, I'd walk outside and listen to the river thaw. The sound reminded me of cracking ice at the gala, the moment deceit broke open. And every time I felt the same small peace wash over me. Justice doesn't roar, it whispers once, and everything changes. A month after the gala, I received another call from Mark. He had started counselling, sold the big house, and was living in a small apartment near town. "I'm learning to cook," he said shyly. "Made your cinnamon rolls yesterday, burned the first batch." I laughed softly. "You'll get there. Just don't forget the recipe for kindness this time." He didn't answer, but I heard him smile through the silence. That night, I opened George's watch again. The hands had settled perfectly at 12, steady as my breathing. I thought of all the mid-term nights I'd spent waiting for others to change. This one belonged to me. And yet a tiny ache lingered. The ache of what could have been if love hadn't grown blind. I didn't push it away. Some aches are proof that you still have room in your heart for hope. Before going to bed, I stood by the window. The moonlight stretched across the snow like a silver apology. In the distance, faint fireworks shimmered from another celebration somewhere far away. The sound didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded me how endings and beginnings often share the same noise. I whispered to the night, "You can lock a door, but you can't lock out truth. It always finds its way in." Then I drew the curtains closed, knowing that whatever waited beyond the next sunrise, I would meet it as myself, not as a mother desperate for approval, but as a woman who had finally remembered her worth. I never thought justice could be quiet, but that's exactly how it sounded the weeks after everything ended, like the slow creak of a house settling after a storm. No cheering, no revenge, no applause now, just stillness. And peace, when it finally comes, is a soundless thing. Each morning I'd wake before dawn, make tea, and walk through the cottage barefoot, feeling the floorboards under my feet like old friends. I no longer jumped at the ring of the phone. I no longer rehearsed what I'd say to anyone. It was strange how light life feels when you stop explaining yourself to people who never listened. The papers had all been signed. My home was once again mine, this time guarded by law and truth together. Mr. Langley handled every signature personally, his thin smile hiding the quiet satisfaction of a man who had helped right a wrong. When he came to deliver the final folder, I offered him a cup of tea. He stood by the window, watching the snowmelt slide from the eaves. "I have to tell you," he said, "in all my years I've never seen anyone handle betrayal with such grace." I smiled. "Grace isn't softness, Mr. Langley. It's just strength that's learned how to breathe." He nodded slowly. "And what will you do now?" "I think," I said, pouring his tea, "I'll build something new out of everything they tried to take." He raised an eyebrow. "Another bakery?" I laughed. "No, something lighter. Something that doesn't need sugar to be sweet." After he left, I walked out back and stood by the small patch of earth behind the house, the one George used to call his second kitchen. I hadn't planted anything there in years. The soil looked tired but patient, waiting. I knelt and pressed my fingers into it. Cold, yes, but alive. Everything that had been taken from me had come from the ground, my home, my living, my peace. So that's where I'd start again. I spent the next week. Afterward, the director pulled me aside. "We could use a volunteer a few days a week," she said gently. I smiled. "You couldn't stop me if you tried." That evening, I walked home with the snow crunching underfoot and the setting sun burning gold behind the trees. I realized that freedom doesn't mean being alone. It means being exactly where you belong, without needing permission to stand there. When I reached the cottage, a small envelope waited in the mailbox. Inside was a folded note in Mark's handwriting. "Mom, I won't come by until you ask me to. I know I've broken too much, but I'm working on myself. Thank you for not giving up on me completely. I love you." There was no return address, no plea for forgiveness, just quiet remorse. It was enough. I slipped the note into George's old watch case. That night, as the fire burned low, I whispered to the empty chair across from me, "He's trying, George. Maybe that's our real inheritance. Not money, not houses, but the courage to begin again." Weeks passed, gentle as snowfall. The lemon tree put out new buds. I started baking again, only small batches, muffins for the children, loaves for the neighbours. When people asked if I was reopening my bakery, I laughed. "No, dear, I'm just feeding whoever's still hungry." Sometimes hunger isn't for food, it's for warmth, for witness, for proof that decency still exists. One morning, as I dusted sugar over a cooling cake, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. I looked older, yes, but not worn down, more like parchment that had finally dried after too many tears. There was peace in that face, the kind that doesn't need makeup or approval. I thought about wills, how people spend years deciding who gets what when they're gone. But the most powerful will, I realized, is the one you write while you're still alive, the will to forgive, to rebuild, to rise. That night I wrote a letter, not for lawyers, but for Mark. It began simply, "My dear son, I once left you everything I owned. This time I'm leaving you something smaller but stronger, my example. Don't let guilt turn into self-punishment. Let it turn into decency. Be the kind of man who doesn't need an audience to do the right thing." I sealed it and left it by the door for when the time was right. The following Sunday, he called again. His voice was steadier. "Mum, I've started volunteering at the shelter. It's strange, I feel like I can finally breathe." "I'm glad," I said. "Do you hate me?" he asked after a pause. "No," I said. "Hate takes more energy than love, and I've finally learned to spend mine wisely." He didn't speak for a long time. Then, very quietly, "Thank you." When we hung up, I cried, but not from pain, from relief, from the knowledge that the cycle had broken. That night, I sat by the fireplace and watched the flames curl like ribbons. The watch ticked softly beside me. Midnight again. The world always comes back to midnight. It's the universe's way of reminding us that endings and beginnings are the same doorway. I poured myself a small glass of wine, something I hadn't done in years, and raised it toward the empty air. "To truth," I said. "To the kind that doesn't need revenge to stay alive." Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and patient. I imagined it covering the footprints that once marked pain, turning them into something almost beautiful. Before I went to bed, I stepped outside. The night smelled of cedar and smoke. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, George, for teaching me that strength doesn't shout. It endures." The wind moved softly through the trees, and for the first time in decades, I didn't feel old. I felt timeless. I went back inside, closed the door, and turned the latch. Not out of fear this time, but ownership. The house, the silence, the life, all mine again. And somewhere deep inside I knew the real will had already been written. Not on paper, but in the choices that had finally set me free. Spring didn't arrive all at once that year. It crept in like forgiveness, quiet, hesitant, one tender breath at a time. The snow retreated from the garden first, curling back to reveal the black soil beneath. Then the air softened, and the wind began to smell like new beginnings instead of endings. I woke up earlier these days, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I wanted to see the sunrise. I'd make tea, feed the sparrows that gathered on the porch, and open every window just to hear the sound of life returning. It had been months since that night at the gala. People in town still whispered when they saw me at the market, Not unkindly, more in awe, as if I'd done something brave. I never felt brave. I just felt awake. One afternoon, I received a letter from Mark. Inside were 2 photographs. In the first, he stood beside a group of volunteers at a shelter kitchen, apron-stained, smiling. In the second, he held a tray of cinnamon rolls, lopsided and overbaked, but unmistakably his own. At the bottom he'd written, "For the first time in years, I feel like your son again." I traced the edge of the picture with my thumb and smiled. That was enough. Not redemption, not perfection, just honesty. Every Thursday, he called. Sometimes he'd bring groceries. Sometimes he'd just sit on the porch while I talked about George or the bakery. He listened now, not with guilt, but with gratitude. That's how I knew he'd changed. The first time my grandson came with him, the boy ran straight to the lemon tree. "Dad says you planted this," he said, excitement bubbling in his voice. "I did," I told him, "but it only grew when I stopped overwatering it. Sometimes love means giving things space." He nodded solemnly, though he couldn't have been more than 12. Then he asked if he could help me bake. And just like that, the kitchen filled again, with laughter, flour, and the hint of joy that doesn't make noise, it just hums. We baked bread, the same recipe George and I had used our first year in the bakery. The smell filled every corner of the cottage, wrapping around me like an old song finding its tune again. When the loaves cooled, my grandson bit into one and grinned. "It tastes like home." I blinked away tears. "That's the secret ingredient," I whispered. Days passed gently. I volunteered twice a week at the orphanage. The children called me Grandma Eve and fought over who got to water the lemon sapling. Watching it grow beside their laughter made me believe in life's strange poetry, that everything we lose returns, just in a different shape. Some evenings, after the children went home, I'd stay behind to tidy up. The director would smile and say, "You don't have to do all that, you know." And I'd answer, "I'm not doing it because I have to. I'm doing it because I can." Freedom, I learned, isn't a gift someone hands you. It's the quiet decision to stop asking for permission to exist. On the anniversary of George's death, I visited his grave for the first time since everything happened. I brought a small jar of marmalade, the same one Claire once refused, and placed it on the stone beside a single lemon blossom from my garden. "I used to think love meant giving everything," I told the wind. "But you were right, George. It means giving the right things, to the right people." The wind moved softly through the trees, scattering petals across the ground. I closed my eyes and let one land in my palm. It felt like closure. When I got home, the evening light spilled gold across the walls. I sat by the window and watched it stretch, the world glowing with forgiveness. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole, not as someone's mother, not as someone's widow, but as Evelyn Harper. Just me. The old pocket watch sat beside the lemon plant, still ticking, still faithful. I thought about all the midnights I had survived, and how every one of them had quietly carried me here, to this gentle, ordinary peace. Before bed, I wrote one last note for myself, folded it, and tucked it under the watch. The world won't always remember what they did to you, but you'll remember what you chose to become instead. I didn't need to write anything more. The next morning, when I stepped outside, I saw the lemon tree had bloomed, 5 bright yellow fruits hanging like small suns. I laughed out loud, startling the sparrows. "Look at you," I said, touching one of the lemons. "You're proof it's never too late to bear fruit." And maybe that's what life had been trying to teach me all along, that endings aren't punishments, they're invitations to grow differently, to love wisely, to forgive without surrender. That night, as the first fireflies of summer blinked across the garden, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and whispered to the quiet air, Last New Year's, they locked me out in the snow. This New Year's, I'll leave my door open for anyone who comes in peace. The stars above looked like the same ones from that night, but they didn't feel the same. They looked warmer now, as if the sky itself had decided to forgive. I leaned back, listening to the crickets, feeling the weight of the years lift off me like frost turning to dew. And in that stillness, I realized something simple and true. Justice had given me peace, but grace had given me life. I closed my eyes, breathing it in, the scent of lemon blossoms, the hum of the earth, the soft rhythm of my heart finally beating without fear. And when I opened them again, the world looked new. If Evelyn's journey touched your heart, share this story with someone who needs to remember their worth. Have you ever forgiven so? Mion, who betrayed you and found peace afterward? Leave your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories where truth, dignity, and karma always find their way home.